Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're taking a look at this. This is the 2GB GTX 960 from 2015. Now the 960 came in both 2 and 4GB versions. Of course the 4GB one, looking back at it, would have been the better choice. But this was Maxwell basically for the masses, you know, less than £200 or dollars got you a capable 1080p gaming card. Some called it the sweet spot card, even this 2GB version, and throughout my testing today I've been a little bit surprised at how well it's handled itself despite its obvious limitations. Should you buy one today? Probably not, but let's see how well this thing holds up. So we're going to start off with Apex Legends today, 1080p with the very low textures option, as well as everything else set to lowest. I've tried to stick to 1080p throughout today's gameplay tests where possible, though FSR has sometimes been necessary, and I will of course mention when I've had to use that. The thing about the 960 here is that it is also rather power efficient, especially in terms of comparisons to its predecessor, let's say the 760 for example. A lot of reviews at the time actually complimented Maxwell on its power efficiency, and as you can see here we're using less than 100 watts of power in Apex, while getting 76 FPS on average, which is better than I thought. Now when it came to Baldur's Gate 3, I did need to enable FSR. There's FSR 1 or 2.2 here, so I selected 2.2 and chose the quality option. 44 frames per second here with a 1% low of 37 and a 0.1% low of 25, so this was a lot more consistent than I was anticipating. As you can see, we're still using less than 100 watts of power with the 960 here. The card is going to be pretty much maxed out in terms of utilization and VRAM throughout. I expected a lot more stutters in this one, as I did with pretty much all the other games I tested too, but yeah, considering it's got 2 gigs of VRAM, I am pleasantly surprised thus far. Next up then we have Cyberpunk 2077. I was sure that this was the game that was going to break the card. 1080p with the lowest settings. Once again we have FSR enabled and set to quality mode here. Now interestingly this game will run okay at plus 30 FPS most of the time at native resolution on this GPU. The 960 is, by the way, still supported. I think the current drivers I have installed at the time of this video are version 560.70, the latest Nvidia driver, so it's still supported for now. Not sure how long that support's going to last. It might be unsupported by the time you actually watch this, but yeah, in terms of performance here, the lowest settings, FSR quality 38 FPS with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 25. So again, in terms of consistency, it was a lot more surprising as well. I still wouldn't necessarily recommend buying one, however, but I am quite pleased to see that it's holding up like this in 2024. I wasn't expecting much of a challenge from Counter-Strike 2. Well, in terms of gameplay, it's always quite challenging. I'm always getting wiped out by enemy players. Some people were asking me if I play with a gamepad. No, I play with a keyboard and mouse. It is like a £10 wireless keyboard and mouse that I bought about 5 years ago. Probably why I'm not very good at this game. Not very responsive, I guess. But yeah, in terms of actual gameplay, it performed pretty well. I went for the medium preset, thought I'd push the boat out a little bit. This turns AA on, or MSAA on, by default I think, so I turned it off here and we saw an average of 151 frames per second. Again, if you look at those percentile lows, sorry, the seagulls outside are fighting over a bit of bacon or something. 92 FPS was that 1% figure, and the 0.1% low was 72. So yeah, again, this represents a pretty stable gameplay experience. Elden Ring is, as you know, capped to 60 FPS by default, but it's sort of irrelevant here because we won't hit that with a 2GB 960. At the lowest settings with high AA, we actually saw 41 FPS. What I will say is that low and medium settings don't perform too differently. I mean, you're going to get around a similar figure. I think those percentile lows may be affected a little bit more, but yeah, I recommend keeping things at low anyway, to be honest. We can still play at 1080p, which is good. If you want to get closer to 60, then a drop to 900 or 720p would be better, but yeah, I'm not sure about that in 2024. You're probably going to want to stick to 1080p where possible, and I think it's certainly more than playable with these settings at this resolution. Fallout 4 also has a default FPS cap, which I've removed for the purpose of this video. 1080p with a medium preset and TAA here, with an average of 64 FPS. This one did exhibit a few more signs of stuttering and frame dips and drops, so the 1% low was 54, but that 0.1% low was 37. Still not too bad at all, but worth mentioning that this felt a little choppier than the other games I've tested so far, at least the majority of them. But yeah, still more than playable, I think, and with the medium settings it still looks okay too. You could certainly push this to high or ultra and still retain at least 30 FPS if you wanted. Now Forza Horizon 5 did give us a low VRAM warning when I first fired the game up. That said, it still ran fine at the low preset. We could have gone with very low, sure, but I thought low gave us better graphics and still retained somewhat playable frame rates. 58 FPS was the average, not quite 60 here. Then we could enable FSR if we wanted to, of course. I felt this was fine. The 1% low was 51. There was the occasional dip in performance. You may be able to pick it up on the frame time graph here, a little spike every so often. This didn't really feel that bad at all. It was very rarely, to be honest, but it did impact our 0.1% low figure, which came back at 17. So yeah, that looks a lot worse on paper than it actually felt to play, put it that way. Now when it came to Fortnite, I actually started off with the performance mode and we were seeing about 200, 250 FPS, so it was unnecessary really. I then switched back to DX11 mode, chose the low preset and enabled the high textures with 100% 3D resolution. I think FXAA is also enabled here. This gave us an average then of 141 FPS, a 1% lower 42 and a 0.1% figure of 18. The occasional dip and drop as I usually see with Fortnite and older cards, but aside from that, definitely playable. Not sure why I went with the higher textures, just to see if the card could handle it really, and it ran absolutely fine. We still saw the occasional dip and drop even with low texture, so I thought why not. I wasn't expecting any trouble from GTA 5. This is of course an older game. I think it came out on PC about 2015 now, so the same year as the card. High settings here, the advanced options were all off. The detail sliders were halfway and FXAA was also enabled. 99 FPS was the average with a 1% low of 75 and a 0.1% low of 68. GTA 5 is an older title of course, but it's still very popular. Still sits within the top 10 most played games according to the Steam game survey, so I like to keep it included in the benchmarks, and it's always nice to see it running well on a wide range of hardware thanks to its age in part. Now I wanted to try Helldivers 2 next because this is a game that will perform really badly when you first start it up, when you're in your spaceship or whatever you want to call it. The frame rate's going to be like 21, 22 FPS, so it made me actually drop the render scale all the way down as well as the settings. I think I chose performance initially, but then when I was actually in the game, I turned the render scale up to quality. So this of course looks a lot sharper. I did keep the lowest settings of course, but overall we saw 50 frames per second with a 1% lower 45 and a 0.1% lower 42. So this was actually really smooth. It was honestly quite surprising, didn't expect to see anywhere near 60 FPS, so getting 50 here was quite a decent result and a solid achievement for the card in 2024 I think. It does make me wonder how well the 4GB card would do in comparison, but this one is holding its own thus far. Although we are limited to the lowest settings and we do need upscaling a lot of the time. I mean that's what it's for, and it's certainly a good example of a card that's had its life, I guess, somewhat extended by this tech. Now I made a YouTube short about this yesterday, but this is Red Dead Redemption 2. I actually had to force this to run with the higher textures and 1080p because it won't let you set that from within the game. There's a VRAM limitation that it won't actually let you exceed, so you have to do it from the INI file. I did choose the ultra textures yesterday. I think that was a bit too much for the card to handle, so I went with high here. There were still a few textures missing and a lot of popping. Everything does emerge after a while, but yeah, you do have to let the game warm up, so to speak, on this card. And we also get a low video memory warning, of course. Apparently we're using basically, or the game's allocating basically everything we have, which is the same throughout, to be fair. But I did find that it was playable even when we tweaked the settings manually. We were still seeing 39 as an average, which I think is fair enough for Red Dead 2. 32 was that 1% low, and the 0.1% low was 30, so pretty consistent. Just a small issue of disappearing game assets, or slowly appearing game assets I should say, but it is doable at 1080p, and probably more so if you keep the textures turned down though. It just looks a bit muddy, that's all. Now I'm going to be honest, I don't know why I bothered with Starfield. I think I was hoping for a miracle, but I went with 1080p, the lowest settings, and FSR set to 50% scaling. I'm sure we may have been able to squeeze a few more frames out of it at 720p with 50% scaling, but it's going to look absolutely horrible. It looks bad enough like this, to be honest. This is with FSR 3 enabled. CAS doesn't really change things, and if you turn off resolution scaling completely, you're going to get about 9 or 10 frames per second. So yeah, there's no area in this game really whereby Starfield is going to be playable on the 2GB 960. I'd have to get a 4GB 960, see if that does any better, but this one, yeah, not really doable, I'm afraid. Let's finalise with Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered then, 1080p with the very low preset. I didn't use FSR here, I used ITGI. I think this may be the game's own upscaling solution, but yeah, ITGI set to quality mode. I don't think it looks quite as good as FSR with the equivalent mode enabled, but it does run a lot better. With FSR, we were seeing drops below 30 quite frequently, but with ITGI enabled, we were seeing 45 as an average. Probably could have bumped things up to the low preset instead of very low, to be honest. The 1% low was 31, and the 0.1% low, 24. So not too bad overall, and this old Maxwell mid-range card, or let's say sweet spot card, has done fairly okay today, despite its obvious limitations these days. Would I recommend buying one? Probably not if you want to play the latest and greatest titles, but if CS2, Fortnite, Apex Legends are on your must-play list, as well as, say, GTA 5, basically older titles, then it's going to be okay for the money. And it may surprise you in some newer releases too, but let me know what you think down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.